December the 23rd, 1986, and one of the trains pulling into Moscow's central station is carrying a very special passenger.
Train number 38 from Gorky brought Andrei Sakharov back from an orderly exile to the swirling uncertainties of Moscow. After 7 years away, he stepped onto a freezing platform and immediately dispatched any doubts about whether he would speak on sensitive issues. On Afghanistan, he said decisive measures were needed to end an unhealthy blemish. On human rights, he said it was impermissible for there to be any prisoners of conscience in the Soviet Union.
By now, Andrei Sakharov was one of the most famous dissidents in the world. He'd been one of the Soviet Union's most brilliant scientists, but he'd become increasingly outspoken about the need for change, and in 1975 he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Hedrick Smith had been based in Moscow for the New York Times in the 1970s, and during that time had got to know Dr. Sakharov well.
He became the dissident's dissident, the man to whom everyone went, Crimean Tatars, Georgians, people from Siberia, Jews who wanted to get out of the country. He was the go-to dissident because he listened to and cared for everyone.
In 1980, the Soviet authorities' patience snapped. Dr. Sakharov had given an interview to an American broadcaster in which he criticized the sending of Soviet troops into Afghanistan a few weeks earlier. On the 22nd of January, he was seized by the KGB in a Moscow street and banished to the closed city of Gorky, 400 kilometers east of the capital. He and his wife would remain there for nearly 7 years.
Andrei Dmitrievich and his wife, Elena Bonner, talked about it as a very, very hard experience. It was not just exile to Gorky, which is a pretty good-sized city and would not have been all that hard to live in, but they lived under virtual house arrest. Whenever they went out to go to the grocery store or to go down the street or get on a bus, they had KGB guys along with them, accompanying them. At one point, they needed health care. His wife needed health care, and they had a hunger strike. And then they were force-fed in the hospital when they were doing the hunger strike in order to get the medical care. So it was a tough internal exile. It wasn't Siberia, but they were isolated, and their own relatives could come one at a time and visit them, but nobody else could. They did have reading, and as a member of the Academy of Sciences, he had access to libraries. He could ask books to be sent to him. He could do research. He could do his own writing, which he did. But it was not an easy existence.
Then, in 1985, a new man took charge in the Kremlin, Mikhail Gorbachev.
If nothing else, Mikhail Gorbachev will bring a change of style to the Kremlin. He's brisk and businesslike with a touch of panache. His career has coincided with an expansion of Soviet power undreamed of even by the Tsars. It's said to have given him a great sense of confidence. The question is, what sort of change will he represent?
Gorbachev did seem to promise reform. Within months, he was talking about perestroika, a restructuring or shaking up of economic and political control. But for many, the true test of his commitment or otherwise to reform depended on what happened to the dissident's dissident, to Andrei Sakharov. It was on December the 19th, 1986, that the announcement came.
The Soviet Union's most famous dissident, Dr. Andrei Sakharov, has been released from exile and is to be allowed to return home to Moscow. The news of his release was given to him in a personal phone call from the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, after a workman had first called round to install a phone. A few hours later, the police guard outside the house was removed.
The announcement was public in Moscow. It had not been confirmed by Sakharov himself, of course, who had been incommunicado up to that point. And everyone was trying to figure out whether some deal had been struck whereby Sakharov would join Gorbachev in his modest reform process, or he would continue his opposition to the one-party state.
Gideon Ramez was head of foreign news at Israel National Radio.
When we sat down for our staff meeting that morning, the editor of the midday show, a good friend of mine, said to me, well, you're good at telephone interviews worldwide. Now Sakharov has a telephone, so get me the interview. And I had about 3.5 hours to do it.
And when he said that, what was your reaction?
Well, it was a challenge. I had to pick it up. And I started calling everyone I could possibly think of inside the Soviet Union or out of it that could have the number. And the answer was uniform everywhere. If you can get it, please give it to us.
But then Gideon Ramez had a stroke of luck. The Israeli telephone exchange found a Russian-speaking operator to work with him, who was as tenacious as he was.
About an hour before the program, she made the suggestion, why don't I just call directory information in Gorky and ask, would you pay for another call? I said, I'll pay for it, you go ahead and try. And she wasn't allowed to give me her full name. I just know her first name, Chava, so thank you again, Chava. I could hear her speaking with the operator in Gorky, and the operator said, Andrei Sakharov, what's the address? My operator said, it's the Andrei Sakharov, we don't have an address. And her counterpart said, we have hundreds of Andrei Sakharovs, no address, no phone number. But Sakharov's wife, Yelena Boner, had a daughter in Israel. We could get the address, and we did, and we got the number, which was really miraculous because the telephone had been installed the same day. I doubt the directory information in Israel or anywhere else would have the number that fast. Chava dialed the number, and Sakharov got on the line.
It was an extraordinary moment. Andrei Sakharov's first contact since the news with the outside world. He didn't seem to know quite what to make of it.
He was, I think, quite suspicious that this was some provocation. I don't think he believed, because I hardly could believe, that from overseas someone had got through to him. So he answered very, very briefly and carefully. And the answer was yes, that he had heard from Gorbachev, and yes, he would be returning to Moscow within a day or two. And the next question was, of course, have you made any commitment to stop your activity? Or will you be continuing as before? And he made absolutely clear that he would be continuing as before.
And that is exactly what Andrei Sakharov did. Within days of his release and his return to Moscow, he was again speaking out.
We all want peace. We all want freedom. I would like to express my gratitude to everyone who helped bring about my release from Gorky. But I hope that we won't forget all the other prisoners of conscience, those who suffer for their convictions, and that we will continue to work for their freedom.
Dr. Sakharov's old friend, Hedrick Smith, was not in Moscow the day the train from Gorky brought Sakharov home. By that time, Hedrick Smith himself was not welcome in the Soviet Union. But he remembers that day well.
Even from a distance, I knew how electric it was, and I followed every single word of his arrival on the train at the train station where the crowds greeted him. And I could feel the emotion even from a distance because the descriptions were so vivid, but also I knew what kind of guy he was and what kind of electricity he generated when he was suddenly liberated and what that meant to people about Gorbachev. And remember, in 1986, there were a lot of people in the CIA and probably in MI5 and MI6 who were skeptical about whether or not Gorbachev was really a reformer and so forth. This was the kind of symbol that was very difficult to deny in terms of its importance and what it said about the vector of where Gorbachev was going to take his Russia.
Mikhail Gorbachev continued his reforms. And in April 1989, Andrei Sakharov was elected to a new parliament, the Congress of People's Deputies, in what was seen as the first free election in Russia since 1917. Andrei Sakharov died later that year of a heart attack, almost 3 years to the day after his release. Hedrick Smith is one of America's most distinguished journalists, and Gideon Ramez is a research fellow at the Truman Institute of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem.